Yeah, okay. So the recording has started now. Okay. Once again, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Prestige lecture series. I'm Sumit Maskar. I'm teaching in public policy school, and I teach courses on labor, labor policy, labor history. And as far as my research interests are concerned, I specialize in the economic sociology of labor, history of workers, rural urban migration, discrimination and exclusion in the labor market, and the education. What I'll do today is talking about the worlds of labor and public policy, because all of you have started, this public policy course, and where does labor fit into this particular public policy? So in the next 25 to 30 minutes, what I'd like to do is to take you through this particular worlds of labor and how that is connected to public policy, so that some of you might be interested in just 1 second. I don't know who is. Hello. Sorry. Sorry, I thought this was official call. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just explain this particular system of labor and where does it fit into public policy. So as far as labor is concerned, you're all familiar with the current migration of laborers from various cities to the countryside. But of course, that is one aspect of labor. Labor particularly has wide-ranging aspect. In fact, a large variety of policies that are designed by the government, whether it's a state government, municipal government, or the national government in Delhi, these absolute various policies they design for the smooth functioning of the economy, society, and the polity. Okay. Now, whether the country is governed by liberal democracy, irrespective of the countries around the world, the policies are extremely important. So, a liberal democracy like India, United States, and several other European countries, and then there is dictatorship. There are totalitarian regimes. There is authoritarian regimes. There are social democracies, or socialist or monarchy. No matter which particular kind of states you look at, policies are definitely at the very core for the smooth and better functioning. Sometimes the states are not interested in the betterment of the population, and sometimes they are explicitly, and sometimes they stay somewhere in the middle. However, if you look at all the kinds of policies that are designed by the state, the policies around labor are very much at the center of contestation, simply because there are various forces that try to assert control over the labor. So there is government, that is the state on the one hand, then you have capital, all the business lobbies, then you have laborers themselves. Sometimes they are organized, but most of the times they are not. And then there is a larger society. So these kind of contestations are extremely visible when it comes to labor. Now, to put it very simply, labor policies refer to the programs adopted by the state to regulate and govern the concerns of the labor in any given country. Now, here it is extremely important to note that the commonsensical understanding of the word labor is that one refers to the work done by those at the lower end of the economy. That is the industrial workers, the security guards, the domestic workers, the courier staff, the municipal sanitation workers, the hawkers who sell all kinds of products on the streets. This is a very limited view of labor, as it includes, it does not necessarily include each and every labor activity, because of course it definitely covers a certain kind of workforce. But let's say, for example, there are top bureaucrats in the government. They are excluded from our imagination of commonsensical knowledge. Then you have corporate officials, a vice president of a particular company, a president of a particular company, or high ranking human resource managers, sales division. So you take any high ranking official position. Then you have soldiers and officers in the army, navy, and air force. You have university teaching and non-teaching staff. You have those who work in the shipping business, the airplane and the cruise staff. So the list can really go on and on. It is these particular wide-ranging workers, in the very broadest sense, that is the focus of the state's labor policy. Now, as far as the labor policy is concerned, what does it actually include? It includes, number one, a regulation of working hours. What is the minimum working hours that is acceptable as per the government norms? So we all know it's 8 hour a working day. So this is legally prescribed working hours. So this is beyond which actually either you are given an overtime wages or it is considered as exploitation. Then there is a standardization and stipulation of wages. So what is the minimum wages that any person should get in the country? So that is decided by the government. It is all part of the labor policy. Then there are compensations and rules regarding extra working hours. And I just mentioned that beyond a certain stipulated hours, either they are compensated or then it actually falls under the exploitation. Then there are provisions for safe working conditions. So what kind of conditions should be there for working? So that is also prescribed by the government. Then there are safeguards for employment, such as involving health risks. So there are wide-ranging occupations where there are health hazards. So the state has to make certain policies to make sure that such health hazards are not faced by the workers. What happens in reality will come. Then there are provisions of medical care or medical insurance. So you have various kind of initiatives taken by the state. We are talking of India, so the initiatives are extremely limited. And then there are entertainment facilities for the workers in different kinds of factories and establishments where they have libraries. Then there are spaces for entertainment, sports, legal protection against arbitrary dismissals. Then there are maternity and paternity benefits. Again, when we talk of India, the proportion is extremely low. Holidays for leisure, childcare facilities in terms of creche and redressal mechanism for grievances related to discrimination and harassment on the grounds of gender, caste, race, religion, and ethnicity, and now sexual orientation. Then there are housing facilities, education for the children of workers. So labor policies takes care of these wide-ranging aspects of what I would like to call them the worlds of labor. So that is part of the labor world. And this is where the state becomes extremely important in creating those policies. But labor policies are also designed to address the problem of unemployment, whereby they create employment guarantee scheme. The biggest scheme in the world actually is the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme that guaranteed the rural residents certain days of employment during the whole period. Now then, these are kind of rights at workplace. Then there are rights so that people do not remain unemployed. Then there are third kinds of rights where the workers have the right to organize themselves in different unions so that they can actually address to the government or various government authorities their concerns that regularly come up during their work. However, what we see is most of the time now that the governments or any big establishment is not necessarily in favor of these kind of workers organizations. And as I said, when we think of workers now, just don't restrict yourself to the workers at the bottom of the economy. Okay, you have to think of workers as wide-ranging workforce. Now, the various skilling centers. So, for example, there are different ways in which the state also consistently thinks of labor. So, for an economy that is growing consistently, we need a very specialized kind of labor, but also you need a very different kind of skilled labor. So, for example, the formation of ITIs, the Industrial Training Institutes. Then there are wide-ranging soft skill. Then there is now, the skilling is an industry in itself. So all of these are part of the broader labor policies, but also the Indian Institute of Technologies. These kind of workers, the engineers, the software engineers, the mechanical engineer. So these are also kind of, upwardly mobile workforce that the state caters to, because the state now realizes that the information technology is one of the important industry. So then the state invests heavily in those particular kind of schools. Of course, there are private players as well, but the state is one of the earliest ones. Then there are policies which are obviously targeted to certain kind of sections of population. So, for example, the Maternity Act directly connects with the women workers, but obviously it is only the upwardly mobile women workers in corporate sector or in the government sector. They are eligible. And for your information, what we mean by government and corporate sector, what I'm referring to broadly is known as the formal sector of the economy. And historically speaking, in India, the formal sector was never more than 8% of the economy. So you can imagine that these kind of various policies only apply to the 8% of the workforce in the country, and they are very successfully implemented in the government sector. It has still its problems, but with government sector, which is only constituting 3 to 4% of the workforce. So when we talk of these great policies, we have to also remember remind ourselves that the proportion of workers who benefit is very tiny. There are different kinds of policies that are made, that tries to cover a wide range, but the most successful ones are in the formal sector. Now, what motivates these particular labor policies? Now, at times, what we see is labor policies are driven by economic goals that are set by the country, or the particular state responds to the pressure of the business lobbies, or they're particularly shaped by the social concerns and the political challenges. So, for instance, as a newly independent country from the British colonial rule, our concern was to become self-reliant. And one of the conditions of the self-reliant, what the state was urging to the laboring population, was to suspend their kind of issues for some time. Because yes, there is exploitation, yes, they do not get enough facilities, yet the state expected the workers across the country that please hold on for some time, because what we need to do is to become a self-reliant economy. And right now the state cannot really address those issues. Then there are other kinds of motivations. An authoritarian state really is not interested in any kind of welfare in some way. So therefore, they might impose really harsh labor conditions, whereby the laborers work for really long hours, they receive less than minimum wages, and there is total absence of social security provisions. And the working conditions itself are absolutely abysmal. But there are also, examples such as the dictatorship in North Korea, Chile, in Pakistan, neighboring country. There have been, now it's not at all a dictatorship at this moment, but there have been episodes of dictatorship. But then there are fascist states in Europe who impose similarly harsh labor conditions. For example, when we refer to the Second World War period, when we talk about Hitler, Mussolini, we do not generally talk of it from a labor perspective. But as far as if you start looking at those fascist regimes from the labor perspective, then you will realize that particularly in Germany, that the Jewish community which was sent to concentration camps, they were also forced to work for various companies in very slave-like conditions. So there are several German companies which were known to make use of these slave laborers. Okay. Now, as far as liberal democracies are concerned, the state takes a welfareist approach, but it can also be massively under the influence of capital. So, for instance, in Western Europe and US post Second World War, there was a massive expansion of the welfare state, and it really took care of a broad range of workers' concerns. But then there are socialist leaning states or social democratic states where the state ensures absolute provision of welfare for its population. But then there is a little challenge here, whereby these kind of welfare provisions come with the suspension of civil and political liberties. So all your civil rights and political rights have become like very tiny when in this particular context. So there are various other challenges. However, there are also possibilities whereby a section of population is covered by welfare provisions and the rest of the population is outside the purview of it. Okay, so you have liberal democracies where a tiny section of population gets welfare provisions and a massive proportion of population stays outside. This is the case with India. So when the laboring population is in a position to pressurize the state, especially the electoral outcomes, the state can then make concessions for the laboring population. Thus, it is this particular interaction and pulls and pressures between the state, the economy, and society that particularly shapes up labor policy in each country. In designing these policies, obviously the role of business lobbies, the capital, broadly speaking, and the politics together with the institution of gender, religion, ethnicity, caste, race is extremely important. Now, this is in a broader overview of what labor constitutes, policy constitutes, maybe in India, maybe in somewhere in other parts of the world. But a very brief, overview could be about the current situation. Now, as students of labor policy, this is an extremely important moment for you to learn how you can actually first understand what the labor problems are, and the second is what kind of solution we can offer. Now, as far as the current position is concerned, clearly you know that there is a corona pandemic, and then the labor issue has really come up in a big way. I mean, this is one of the most important story of this particular, corona pandemic. As you all saw, I mean, the whole world actually saw that in April 2020, there was a massive exodus of migrant workers from Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, all kinds of big cities. Workers were moving back to their places of origin. And obviously, technically speaking, what is currently happening is an health emergency that, because of this whole viral infection that can actually spread a little faster, it is a health emergency. But the impact of this health emergency was the exodus of this massive amount of migrant workers to their villages. Now, so it does not remain only a health emergency, it also becomes a labor issue. And therefore, the state governments initially, then the national government, they had to actually assure the workers that don't go anywhere and some things will be taken care of. Okay, so for that, the state had to immediately devise policies. Some state governments were far better in doing this, and other states were definitely pretty bad. So here the more connections of politics becomes important. So there are certain political parties which are more inclined to do little minimal welfare than compared to the other political parties. So this is as far as migrant workers are concerned. And without these migrant workers, none of the cities will function efficiently. So from your morning bread and milk to the different kind of things that are repaired, your car repair, your different instruments that are repaired in your household, to fixing your air conditioner, to like selling certain kind of vegetable, fruits, and the plumber, the electrician. So there are wide-ranging services that you as an individual and your family require in big cities. And these services are then performed by these particular migrant laborers who do not necessarily live in the best possible conditions in the city. Okay, and that is the reason labor becomes extremely important for your living. Now, I have been recently also, giving lectures on what I call them as the neglected corona warriors. Now, you have all heard that when we think of warrior as a word, we immediately what comes to our mind is the army. The army, navy, the air force, the soldiers and officers, and how great job they're doing at the borders. But in this particular current context of the corona pandemic, where it's a global health emergency, we have new kinds of warriors, because the kind of warriors which we are used to, they are not able to protect us in this particular moment because they themselves are vulnerable to the corona infection. So obviously what we know from newspaper reports, from television, the media, is the doctors obviously are the most obvious warriors. Then you have the nurses who get decent amount of attention. Then there are police personnel across the country. In each state there are different police officials who are risking their lives and they are doing their duty, but they also face the risk of getting the infection. And depending on which state you are, yeah, in your regional language, newspapers, news media, you will have come across daily some, the reporting being done that, okay, today these many police officials have been infected with corona, some police officials have died. So this is the common story. But these are not the neglected ones. The neglected ones work at 3 levels. Okay, the first level are the sanitation workers who work inside the hospitals. Okay, sanitation workers, cleaning staff, waste pickers inside the hospitals. Now, hospital itself, when the patients are admitted, particularly those patients who are elderly, who could not cannot perform their daily functions of urine and human waste, depositing the human waste in the toilets. For that, you need the lower level workers inside the hospitals. So unless these patient bodies are cleaned and things are kept neat and tidy, even the doctors cannot perform their basic role. So they are the workers who are at the absolute front line of this war against corona. And they are the ones who clean the hospitals, and because everybody is afraid right now, and nobody, at least the middle classes, are barely able to step outside their homes. But in this particular kind of crisis situation, these workers were definitely going and doing their job. So besides handling the patients and making sure that everything is clean, in the end, there are several deaths that are also happening inside the hospitals, and these deaths are related to corona. Now, there is so much fear that is there among the entire population in the world that even the dead bodies are not being handled by their own relatives. In such circumstances, it is again these workers who wrap up the bodies, and they are again risking their lives by doing that particular job. And then they actually send it to the crematorium or cemetery. Now, this is where our second section of the neglected warriors are. So when you go to crematorium or the cemetery now, you must have also read the reports, or you can just Google and check the reports, that in the initial phase, and even now in many cases, the nearest relatives, even they did not even go to pick up the bodies of their relatives. And it was again these workers who went along with the dead body, and then all those workers who are working in those cemeteries and crematoriums, they were the ones who were performing the last rites. So like their own relatives, even these workers had the risk of getting the corona infection, and yet they were performing their duty. And this is the second neglected workforce. Now the third one are the sanitation workers, those who collect the waste from everybody's household. They clean the streets, and then they are handling all kinds of waste. And then there are workers who do work in the sewage. Okay. Now, as you all know, that from late March to early April, everyone was expected to stay indoors. We were given strict instructions of really not stepping outside the house unless it's necessary. Obviously, the world was paranoid, and pretty much a large amount of people obeyed the government orders that they stayed in. Okay. Now, we all also know that the staying in the house is a big luxury, which not everyone can afford. But even in this particular situation, what is important that for your own living, so even when you're not stepping outside your own house, what you definitely do as every individual, actually, particularly middle class, upper middle class, everyone, even everyone in that sense, you create waste, and that waste has to be channelized in a particular direction. So for example, you cook vegetables, you have the waste that is created from the peel of the onions to vegetables. If you cook meat, you cook fish, each and everything produces everyday waste. Okay. Now that waste has to be dumped from has to be taken away from your house and dumped at a particular location. And if that is not taken off beyond a particular limit, like after 2 days, 3 days, that particular waste will start to stink inside the house, which also might have health consequences. So which means that even in this particular lockdown situation, when people were expected to stay at home, this particular activity had to go on every day because we are producing waste. Then the second kind is, of course, there are chocolate wrappers, biscuit wrappers, so all kinds of waste is produced every day. So just because you stay at home doesn't mean you don't produce waste. Obviously, the second kind of waste is again using the toilets for urinals and depositing the human waste. This is an activity is extremely crucial for the human beings, but also for general living beings. But again, in order for us to perform that function, the sewers and the lines have to be regularly maintained. And it is here, these sewers, you see that the regular deaths are occurring among those who are known as the manual scavengers, because they enter with their bare bodies and then they are surrounded by this kind of toxic chemicals that is inside these particular kind of sewers, and several of them die on a weekly basis. So this is what constitutes the third section of neglected warriors. So what I try to do in today's lecture is to give you an overview of what exactly is the worlds of labor. So first part was to draw attention to the fact that when we think of labor, do not restrict your imagination only to the lower level of the economy. We have to really broaden our understanding of including wide-ranging workforce for our analysis. Then the second part is to understand that irrespective of what kind of political regime the state is, they have to create a labor policy. Obviously, the labor policies are not always necessarily in favor of improving labor conditions. They may actually be interested in maintaining the status quo, where the workers do not necessarily get their dues, the wages according to what is necessary. They do not have medical facilities. So that is the case for a very wide-ranging population in India and across the world, especially the developing part of the world, what we call. So that's as far as the variation. And the third, what I'd like to highlight here is that how these different kind of laborers are so essential for the smooth functioning of the economy, the society, and the polity. And that for that precise reason, it is extremely important that as public policy students, you also take into account this aspect. So obviously, some of you might be interested in health. So health and labor are also connected. Some of them might be interested in education. And I just highlighted that depending on what the economy and the country needs, you also need to think of different kind of educational policies which can be more inclusive and address the different needs of the economy. So you go in each direction. Some of them might be interested in gender, they might be interested in caste. Each of these issues is linked to a labor policy. And this is the way some of you obviously might be interested, a few of you might be interested. And of course, whenever our session starts in person on campus. So this semester I won't be teaching you, but next semester I think I will be teaching you. And I look forward to having more interaction with you in person on campus. So the floor is open for questions. So please unmute your mic to ask questions. Yeah.
Good morning, sir. My name is Shubham.
Okay, Shubham. Yes, tell me.
Sir, my question is when we are talking about the labor policy and the labor's benefits, like I would like to ask that most of the section of our labor is work in unorganized economy. I mean,
Yes.
they are daily wage worker who has not any piece of contract, or they just go and take their daily wages and come after 5 o'clock, just ending their shift. They don't have any entries or as such to regulate that. So how we can accumulate them in the policy manner so that, for their well-being, because they don't have any rights, or if they raise their rights, there is no any entry for that.
Yes, Shubham, thanks for the question. As you rightly pointed out, the overwhelming majority of our laboring population is in the what is known as the informal sector. But here I would like to make a small distinction, which is generally overlooked. So there is something called formal sector and something called informal sector. But there is something also known as formal conditions of employment and informal conditions of employment. And this distinction is extremely crucial. Now, the first part, what is formal sector of the economy? The formal sector of the economy, which directly falls under the purview of the state, that you have a certain minimum threshold of employees that are hired by a particular establishment. Once you cross that limit, immediately you fall under the purview of the state. Okay, so that becomes part of the formal sector of the economy. All those that does not fall, they are becoming part of the informal. In that sense, at present, we have roughly 94 or ish percent of the economy, which is considered as informal economy. Okay, and we have only roughly about 5, maybe 6, so 5 or 6 maximum, and 94 to 95. So 5 to 6% of the economy, which is considered as formal. So the 94 to 95% of the economy that we are talking about, almost 99.9% workers pretty much are on the informal work contract. So informal conditions of employment is the norm in the informal sector of the economy. But let's look at the formal sector of the economy, which is 6%. And after the 6%, roughly 2 to 3% is basically the government offices, state government, national government, then you have municipal corporations, rural, like the Zilla Parishads. So you have all these offices which comes under the government employment. So all those who work for these agencies. Now, even here now, roughly 40 to 45% of the workforce is hired on contractual basis, which means that the conditions of employment in the formal sector are also informal. So which means there are absolutely tiny proportion of the workforce. Okay, so that's first clarification I usually like to give, because usually there is confusion of what constitutes where. So ideally speaking, when people expect that if it's a formal sector, everybody has good conditions of employment, they get good social security benefits, but that is not correct opinion. That within the formal sector, it could be private formal sector or public formal sector, there is massive contractualization actually happening. Nearly 40 to 50% within that 6% actually. So technically speaking, only 2 to 3% of this country's population actually has access to better working contracts, like long-term contracts, no unnecessary dismissal of the workforce. So as far as your direct question is concerned on how do we actually address, now obviously the most simple answer and the not the best answer is that the issue is complex, because when we are saying informal sector, there are really wide ranging workers. In the city, I already explained, there are these hawkers, security guards, then your domestic workers, then in the villages you have the rural agricultural laborers. So you have really wide range of informal sector. So you can't really address them in one go at one particular thing. But there could be this particular kind of minimum threshold of facilities that needs to be given. The other part which lots of labor organizers particularly argue is that forget about these kind of facilities or doing certain kind of charity to the workers, give them the absolute minimum wages that are prescribed by the state, and then we won't have to face many problems. Because if you give them minimum wages properly, which is, because minimum wages are calculated as per the living costs in respective countries. So if there at least the minimum wages are given, and then obviously which increases gradually as you spend more time in the same firm, then probably they can themselves take care of decent housing, decent standard of living for themselves, children going to decent schools. So they themselves can take. So I think one of the ways of looking at this problem is to obviously look at it from a charity perspective, that we need to fix a little bit, do some small thing here and there. The other part is to talk in terms of the rights, like need to put the wages of the workers, of course, at the center, but also the other working conditions. Yeah. Okay, who is next? You can also type the questions for in case you are unable to speak because of internet issues.
Hello, sir.
Yes, can you tell me
Yes, sir. My name is Aniket.
who is this? Yes, Aniket.
Yes, sir. My question is, sir, in recent years, it is said that we have entered into the fourth industrial revolution. So it is the world of Internet of Things and automation. So my question is how these new emerging technologies are going to impact the labor policies in the India and as well as world.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, technology is an extremely newer area when it comes to labor policies, and in many ways we haven't been able to look around these particular issues. So one of the issues that obviously that has also expanded the labor. So let's say, for example, this call center. So this is where the tech is important. So people are sitting in Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi, Calcutta, and they are talking to customers around the world. And these are companies which are based in Europe, or they are based in US or Australia. They are catering to those customers in that particular country, but the customer support for them is actually organized in India here. Now, obviously, there are different challenges that comes. For example, the absolute initial challenge, for 15 years ago when this call center revolution started, was that there were lots of psychological, issues, the trauma the workers had to go through because they had to impersonate as somebody else, and they have to speak in a particular accent. Things have changed now, but that particular kind of challenge still remains. Now, as far as the technological other parts are concerned, let's say, for example, the technology of surveillance. Okay, so putting CCTV cameras. Now, obviously, the one ways in which technology has been told to us is that, look, it will improve. We will know if some thief is coming or not. We can easily, get hold of them. But what we are not paying attention to the fact is that these kind of CCTV cameras are putting the workers in full-time surveillance. Okay. Now there are CCTV cameras where the security guards are sitting. Now the security guard might just go and take a break for 2 minutes and come, and in that exact moment something happens, then there is absolute surveillance on the worker as well. Okay, so in a way it is working against the workers, the technology. So sometimes it is working for them, but in also many cases it is working against. Now let's say take example of school teachers. Okay, or let's say the best example maybe is the creche. You have the creches or the play schools where the parents are now assured that, okay, you look at the camera, okay, you can see, okay, good, your child is safe and fine there. But at the same time, that same camera can be used to monitor the workforce that is sitting there in that particular room. And even the very slightest thing can be picked up for them to penalize those workers. So in some way, technology creates newer kind of opportunities, newer kinds of jobs, but at the same time, it actually reinforces the older forms of surveillance and labor control. And that is working against the workers in general. So, but it's a very interesting area, and I think there is a big scope to work on technology and labor. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Yeah. Who else would like to, maybe a comment, not necessarily question?
Good afternoon, good morning, sir. Pranav Joshi, right?
Yes. Yeah.
My question was that when I talk of, say, necessarily blue collar labor in particular, it is often seen that they are there's an antagonistic relationship between the administration and the actual workforce, so to say, always. So how can policy help in slightly bridging the gap between this sort of adversarial relation?
Okay, that's a good question. Thanks, Pranav. Okay, so obviously, the one of the important reasons for the conflict emerges out of the facilities that the workers are expecting for themselves. Yes. And as I said that when we talk of facilities, we are also talking of facilities for everyone. So let's say that the kind of workers, I mean, we have to treat the army officials also as workers, because they get I mean, it's, we have a different status for them in the society, and that's perfectly fine. But at the end of the day, they are also getting wages. They get monthly wages. They get different kinds of medical facilities. They get kind of all kinds of other social security benefits from that particular job in the military, army, and the navy. So these kind of basic facilities, as I said, are not available for all over the country. And because of that particular problem, these workers do not get wages which are prescribed by the state. So the minimum wages are not given. And the other facilities are not given. So that creates kind of conflict. Okay, so wages, working conditions is one part, but to also talk to workers in a very abusive language, that is also not acceptable. Okay, and also there is a physical violence sometimes that happens. So there are various reasons why the conflict comes into place between the employers and the employees. And depending on the kind of conflict, one has to find resolution. So, for example, the sexual harassment at workplace. Okay, so we have the judgment from Vishakha case in Rajasthan. Now, obviously, there was this woman who was performing her particular work as a, on the project which was sponsored by the state government. And then there was sexual harassment that she has to confront. Now, technically, she was doing her job, and yet she was facing that particular problem there. So that led to the formation of policy that there should not be sexual harassment at workplace. So this is how policies are made. Now, whether it gets implemented or not, it depends on each and every organization. So some organizations are more serious than others, because see, this is how various policies are made. So you need to have those policies. First of all, we need to find the issue between the blue collar workers and the administration, and whether the administration has the capacity to resolve. If it is resolved, then the tensions are resolved. But if there are some irresolvable kind of problems, then obviously they will continue to erupt again and again and again. So depending on what kind of conflicts are there, we have to also be sensitive to those kind of issues, and then only we can produce a better labor policy in that particular context.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you. So who would like to go next?
Good morning, sir.
Yes, Puneet.
This is Puneet. Yeah.
Yes.
So, sir, my question is, we have had labor laws in terms of setting up of wages for a while now, and do you believe, and we like the laborers are essentially still not empowered. So do you believe it's time for us to let the free markets decide the wages of the labor?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Puneet. Because see, there is a common understanding that the market will take care of the justice, the issue of justice to laborers or general society. But as I just mentioned, that technically speaking, more than 92% of the workforce is actually not regulated by the state, and the state actually does not really intervene for those workers, which we call as informal sector. And those workers were then what you are suggesting, that the market forces. So it is the market forces that have been deciding what kind of wages they should be given. So even though it is way less than minimum wages, it is the market which actually decided what kind of facilities that are tolerable. These are much lesser than what the state would expect the employers to do. So far, our history, I mean, the West is more, different society, but our history at the time of independence, 92% of the economy was informal. And the only thing that has happened in the 70-80 years is that it has only grown. And all the reports, various commissions that have been instituted since independence, they all hint towards the fact that the conditions of informal sector laborers is extremely vulnerable. They do not get minimum wages. The conditions are absolutely abysmal. In many cases, there are lots of health hazards related to that particular kind of work. And then obviously there is no social security provisions. So there are wide-ranging challenges. So technically we have examples of market actually deciding what is better. But sadly, our picture is very depressing, even from the other side. Yeah. So market may not necessarily be the answer. Yeah.
I have an add-up question to that, if that's okay.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yes.
So even in that 92% informal sector, there exist labor laws and labor unions that go ahead and decide the, say, wages and everything. So the market, even in that 92% area, is not free. So how does that go about?
See, the thing is that first of all, the labor unions never decide wages. It is the government who decide. So the expectation of the government is that whether you work in the formal sector or informal sector, the workers should get minimum wages. Now the trouble with informal sector is that this, because it is not under the purview directly, they are not really regulating it properly, then the employers actually can flout all the regulations. And this is where the employers do not necessarily pay them minimum wages. Okay. And this is where the big problem is. And since the labor unions are not at all powerful in, historically they have never been, and even now they are not necessarily powerful. So they are not able to put any pressure on the employers in the informal sector so that they can pay them decent wages and provide other kinds of facilities. So that remains a big problem. Otherwise, we probably would not be discussing this problem. We would still be discussing something else. So, so that's why I think that part where you just said that, laborers have, they do not necessarily have powers in the informal sector.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Is there any other question? I'm just going to read Anil's question. In this highly technological advanced scenarios, people like vegetable vendors, hawkers, and like are losing jobs because of access of online things to people. And even people are finding it easier to access them from home instead of going out. For example, earlier we used to go, yes. So what should be done? So Anil, these are kind of interesting moments for any particular country or the movement around the world, where any new technology that actually is introduced, it changes the existing arrangement. So for example, in the early 20th century, there were typists. So if you look at the older films, I mean, you guys are pretty young to even have seen a probably, typewriter. Probably you would have seen. So typist came in. Okay. So of course, typists were extremely important in all government offices, all private, and each and every person had a typewriter of, various kind. But gradually in late 80s and early 90s, they were replaced by computers in a very big way. And that was a big loss for jobs for so many people, because this was really a big change that came in. And gradually, of course, it created problems for some kind of laborers, but it also opened up opportunities for wide-ranging new laborers, not just them, but it also opened opportunities for all the hardware technicians, all the sales managers or the sales personnel who would go and sell those computers. So these are also, two sides of the coin. Now, when you talk of, let's say, all the vegetable vendors and they are facing challenges, I completely agree with you. This is a very important change that has taken place. But if you look at the other side of it, which is there was a massive increase in the courier staff. Let's say Zomato, Big Basket, and I don't know, whichever, like you take whichever name, Grofers, they all heavily depend on human beings to actually go and deliver. So in that sense, it also creates opportunity. But at least, if you look at all the middle class localities, it's only for this particular emergency period that they're heavily relying on these kind of services, especially for vegetables and foods, what you just said. But let's say for packed food and all, probably this will be the case now. This is going to set the pattern in the years to come, that people, if they feel that, on the click of some button, if something is going to come to your doorstep, there is no point in wasting time. But certain things like vegetables, there have been reports, you can just Google online and you can see those newspaper reports where the shop owners have taken advantage of this situation, and they have been sending, not the best particular vegetables or fruits to the customers. So given this particular challenge, it is very likely that, section of population will still go back to the market for basic vegetables. But also we need to understand from other labor perspective that there is a wide, range of jobs now that are available, because courier was a very small segment in the 90s early. But with this particular apps that have come, so Zomato, like all these restaurants that are connected, then there is a massive business. So there is a massive expansion of labor in this particular sector. Okay, so we need to look also at transitions, and this is inevitable. As we go progress further with technology, certain things are inevitable. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, is there anyone who'd like to make a comment or a question? Anything?
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, good morning, sir. Sir, my question was regarding, sir, I just wanted to get your opinion regarding the labor unions in India as to why aren't they as strong as they can be given their population?
Okay, so part of the reason is the policies that are designed by the state. Okay, so whether the state is tolerant towards labor unions or not. Then the second part, which is the business lobbies, are they tolerant? And the answer to both is no, because the state is not tolerant, because it is not just the labor issues that they highlight, because they also become a political force, because they also then contest elections, they send their labor leaders to the parliament, which is where political parties, a large political parties, I mean, you can have some exceptions, they are not very much keen on such things. But by and large, our policy has been not very much favorable to those labor unions. And when the state is not favorable to the labor unions, then there is very little choice for laborers to actually come and organize as a particular group. So yes, in terms of absolute numbers, we have a big workforce. We have also one of the most youngest workforce and the population in the world. But the state is not very much interested, and for the reasons that they do not want to what is known as trouble, so that they also want to go on things, again within code peacefully, and so that people don't really raise questions about the kind of exploitation or any sorts of problems that they are facing. So if anything, I think the problem also lies with the state. But the second problem is also with the kind of establishments. So if you look at the history of labor unions, they were mainly concentrated in big factories. So Bombay, Calcutta, Ahmedabad, Kanpur, Coimbatore, these were the sites for bigger factories, or Bhilai steel plant, Jamshedpur. So all these were like really big industrial sites where there was a massive amount of workforce. Okay, and that particular kind of workforce was easily then mobilized. So right now what we have is far more scattered workforce. So for example, the domestic workforce, they just work in so many different sites, so it's difficult to also enforce certain kinds of mechanisms. So there are challenges from the state that they are not really keen. Then there are employers who are resisting any kind of unions that needs to be formed. But there is also economic condition that the historical sites for labor organizations were the big industrial cities, and that has collapsed completely. From early 90s to late 90s, all major factories around the larger cities have completely closed down. And in that place, you have smaller offices, smaller workshops, and then there is not. Then there are technical problems in organizing them. Okay, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you for your answer, sir.
Sir, sorry, I'm reading Anil's question, I believe, or Anil's question is done. Okay, Anil's is done. Now this is Palak. What do you have to say about the informal treatment of informal labor working in the Middle East, living in absolutely dire situation and force? Even though there are many labor organizations picking up against this torture, why isn't anything substantial? Okay, so as far as this, what is known as the immigrant laborers, obviously There are international organizations which consistently highlight that there are problems there, that they are not really good conditions. But the international agencies do not have the powers to really enforce anything. These are mostly recommendatory in nature. They can only request those particular governments. So unless and until the governments actually decide that, okay, we can be a little bit more human to the workforce, things won't change. So unless and until the government takes it as one of the important decisions that this is what the minimum threshold has to be done, does not happen. And the other reason that it does not happen is that this is how they get cheap labor, not just Middle East, but also across the country. So even in India, there are workers. So I have done 2 surveys. One was on the mill workers of Mumbai. This was involving more than 1,000 workers. So I was mainly interested in looking at the conditions of their post closure of the factories and looking at how they respond to. And there obviously there is a bigger picture there, but there is another survey which I conducted, again involving more than 1,000 workers, was on the migrant laborers. So these are the exact migrant laborers which were walking back to their villages now in the last 2-3 months. If you look at the salaries of like monthly salary was 5,000, 6,000 rupees, and they were working sometimes 10 to 12 hours, sometimes more than 12 hours. Okay. Now, because these establishments fall outside the purview, the state is also not very keen on intervening and making sure that they get minimum wages. The exploitation persists. But on the economic side, because we have cheap labor, because there is exploitation that's happening, you are also likely to get more businesses because you are better in competition with, let's say, Bangladesh, because they also have a large army of cheap laborers in the global garment industry. Okay, so these are the challenges overall that actually there are there. So the first challenge, of course, is not the policy in general. So policy in itself will not fix the problem, because unless the policy takes care into it takes into account rather the political situation, the social situation, and then this employer thing, that won't happen. And for that to happen, you of course need to have a little what is known as a social and political consensus. That what do we mean by consensus? That we agree that, okay, below this minimum threshold, nothing should be done. And for that to happen, of course, there is far more, social concerns have to be consistently addressed through media, through television, and different kinds of, sensitization programs, so that people also be aware. What my experience of, studying labor for the last 15, 16 years suggests that in large proportion of the population actually have no clue about different kinds of laborers. And they think that maybe things are better. I mean, one of my classic question has been for the undergraduate class is, what is your understanding of the formal sector? What do you think? How much is it? So these are economic students. I mean, and they have been trained for 1 or 2 years. And this has been, I have given lectures at various places. And they would range sometimes from 40, 50%, some would say 80%. Now, obviously, even that basic knowledge is not there. So once we have the basics correct, we will know actually, wow, that has been going on for really long and for a large proportion of the population. And so there is a very long-term solution rather. So, and also for Middle East and also for India. The Middle East problem is that India as a country can't do anything. The only thing it can do is it can stop its laborers, but then it will have other kinds of international consequences. All right, so Suparna Agarwal. So here's, you mentioned that authoritarian states have harsher labor laws or lack thereof, but we see market forces are against wage regulations and unions don't have enough influence. In this case, is there anything else? So yeah, I think there are always these similarities. The reason I mentioned, there is authoritarian, there is totalitarian regimes, there are dictatorships, and even within the liberal democracies. For example, there is what you just said partly in your question is that totalitarian regimes, there are no labor laws in that sense. It's absolute suspension of it. So basically, it is in that sense what somebody also said. It's pretty much led to to the market to decide. And market itself is not a regulator of justice, okay? Because the market is influenced by, there is a book called India Working by now retired professor from Oxford University called Barbara Harris White. In her argument, she says that the market itself, when we say the market itself is regulating, it does not just regulate on its own. It is regulated by the social institutions of gender, of caste, on religion, on ethnicity. In the West, it is race as well. So these are kind of market, and they are not necessarily egalitarian in nature. And that is the reason the problem there persists. So as far as the authoritarian states are concerned, or even those where we do not have any regulation. In such cases, one way is obviously to demand better wages. And one of the ways to do that is to create more political pressure. So are they able to do it? Answer is no. Because let's say there are migrants from Odisha, they go and work in Gujarat. Now in Gujarat, they are not the voters there. They are just migrant laborers. So their issues, even if they are addressed by the Odisha government, the Gujarat government is no way obliged to actually, perform the way they are expecting it. So that's how the migration, sometimes it helps people to come out of poverty, but it also creates different kinds of labor organization problem. But let's say the same Odisha migrant laborers would be also migrating within the Odisha state. Then actually it would be different. So that's why we have different kind of challenges. So the challenges are absolutely multi-layered when it comes to what we know as the informal sector laborers or unorganized laborers. And the problems are extremely wide. So for example, security guards. So you only have one security guard in one building. Okay. Now, how do you, and as an employer, it's either resident welfare association, they have 4 security guards. Now, there are so many welfare associations. There are individual banks, they are employing their security guards. So maybe bank as an employer could easily get hold of saying that, okay, you are hiring 500 workers, now we can talk to you. But individually, it's far more challenging. How many resident welfare associations are we going to go and approach and actually expect them to do a better job? And so there are structural challenges in actually addressing the labor problems. But that doesn't mean that it cannot be addressed. It's just that one has to be far more creative in thinking what are the different ways one can put together these workers. One of the most creative experiment was done by the women workers in Ahmedabad, in Gujarat, what is known as SEWA. So these are self-employed women's association. And they were able to actually successfully do certain kind of, place certain kind of their demands to the state. And they were able to make a little bit of difference. So there are different ways of creativity that needs to be actually deployed in order to address each question. Of course, today, because we're discussing labor, we will, talk about labor and how are the creative ways in which we can address. But there are also all kinds of issues, and as public policy students, you will be exposed to different kinds of problems. And for each problem, we'll have to be more creative in thinking what kind of policies are there and how effectively that can be implemented. All right, so it's Leshan.
It starts with I. My name starts with I.
Sorry?
Good morning. So my name starts with I. I for ice cream.
Okay. Oh, I so so it's Ishan.
Ishan.
Okay.
Yeah. So
okay, yeah.
I joined a class a little bit late. I don't know if you have addressed this question. I wanted to understand what is your understanding of the recent labor law reforms that UP government has done. And at the same time, they have created that system of registration for the laborers, and then probably kind of organizing them, making it transitioning. I see it as a transitioning towards formal sector, as if they are registering there and then making jobs available to them through that registration process and whatever. I don't know the details exactly, but I would like to understand your point of view on that.
See, at the moment, what UP and other, I think it's also Madhya Pradesh and 1 or 2 more states, what they have done is what is, put it very simply, they are called suspension of labor laws for some times. Now, the problem is that with all labor laws is not only restricted to wages. There are kinds of lots of accidents that happened at workplaces. There are kind of hazardous situations where workers are forced to work, and these kind of and these kind of issues actually are extremely difficult to address once the labor law is suspended. At least when the labor laws are in place, there is a scope to argue for a particular case that these things are not acceptable. Now, with the suspension, actually, it is going to be extremely challenging. And even the introduction of new labor codes that the government is attempting to do, this will create more problems for the labor than the solution. Now, the second part of your question was, yes, they are doing some registration of workers and through which they would like to give them work. Now, the problem is not the registration. The registration is a great thing as long as it is done in a proper due process of law. The second part is what kind of work are they going to give? Is this the work which will be more, more in tune with the kind of benefits that we have been talking about for a good job? Minimum wages, social security provision, healthcare provisions. If there are women workers, giving them maternity benefits. The answer to that question is no, actually. And in that sense, it is not really going to help in the very long run, because right now the registration and all these kind of acts are also done by the state governments, because there is a massive pressure from the workers. Because see, UP and Bihar particularly, and also Odisha, these are the states which have supplied migrant laborers, to various states in the country. Now, obviously, as long as the machine keeps working, which means, the system keeps working, the workers go, they come back, they do their farming. Then when there is no farming, they go back and work to other states, come back. So as long as the cycle keeps going on, it's perfectly fine. The moment the cycle stops, because these workers have really bare minimum wages even when they go to other states. And they are not even in a position to say that, okay, let me sit for 5 months at home and then relax and then let's go back to work when the whole system is back in order. They are not in a position to do that. And it is precisely for that reason they felt that at least at their home in village, they don't have to pay rent monthly for wherever they live. There are no extra expenses for food. Some, whatever their family members are eating in the village, they will also join them. So in that sense, the pressure on the political parties which are ruling the state is extremely high, because they have really returned in big numbers in both UP and Bihar. And therefore, the government have to respond in a particular way. So as you just rightly said, this is a one particular policy that they have created. Let's create a registration for them. Now, whether that is going to help or not, we will of course have to wait and observe the pattern. But looking at the history of labor relations, these kind of particular emergency situations, the answer is not very promising. But we will have to, for such kind of analysis, usually we have to wait till we actually look at what exactly happens.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Is Purva still? Purva, you have a question?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon,
yes,
sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, the question is related to suspension of the labor laws during the coronavirus pandemic. So this was done to incentivize the economic activities, but on the other hand, the laborers have been put in a compromising position. So how this challenge can be addressed through policies?
See, this is in some way it's a less of a policy problem and more of a political problem. Okay. So we have to also understand the distinction sometimes. So these are more political decisions which have adverse consequences for the constituency of labor that we have been talking about. So in some way it is, yeah, as I said, it's a less of a policy problem. It's more of a political problem because it's only few state governments which are doing it. If you look at, it's not that all the 29, 30 states and union territories, everybody is going in that direction. So for example, let's say lockdown. So lockdown was absolute global medical emergency. So every state followed it, without much trouble, because there was no way they could have done anything else but to do a lockdown and request people to stay where they are. But as far as labor laws are concerned, it's only few governments who are doing it. So it's a political problem, and how they actually look at labor and these kind of issues. So depends on which political parties they rule. Some of them are more favorable to decently favorable, because by and large our overwhelming majority of the laborers are not in the best situation. But given these limitations, some states have still, kind of, with very minimal welfare kind of thing, and the other states are not. So yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So, is there any question? Okay. So looks like so far there is no question, and which means we can close the discussion for today. So thank you all for paying attention to this lecture, and also for participating with your extremely interesting questions. As I said, this semester I won't be teaching you, but I look forward to taking some class on research methods, particularly survey methods, or teaching those who are interested in labor are welcome to join one of my labor courses. But I really hope to see you in person in the next semester. Thank you all.